All right, so that was width and height. Next up, we're going to talk about border. Now, border is actually, well, there is a border property, but there are also dozens of border-related properties because there are different pieces that we can control: the thickness, the style, the color, and then we can do that for the left, the right, the top, the bottom. Plus, we can do things like rounding the corners. There's quite a bit that we can do. So we're going to take it slow, but obviously a border, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think border is one of the more obvious one of these properties for the box model. It is the border around an element. We see borders all over the place. This is MDN. If we take a look at, this right here, that search box has a border around it. It has rounded corners, but it is a border. Right here, we've got a border around this element, or this, whatever this is, a div, a nav, and a side, and then likely a top border that is different. Same thing here. We've got a blue border around each one of these little items and a thicker left side. So we can control all of that. We can get quite granular. Here, I assume, is a left border, a thick left border, and no border on the top, right, or bottom. Long story short, borders are all over the place. They're an important part of making, first of all, a nice looking website, but also they play an important role in making it clear what certain things do, or bringing attention to certain elements. We can change the border, for example, as I hover, and that makes it very clear that I'm doing something when I click, or that this is clickable or selectable, right? I can interact. Okay, so the main properties you need to understand, the first three are border width, border color, and border style. I don't know if I went overboard making this diagram. It's not very intuitive, but I'm showing that border width controls the thickness. We have border color, it controls the color, and then border style controls the line style. So that can be dashed or dotted, solid. There's a couple others. Most of the time I'm just dealing with a solid border, but I'll show you all the possible options. So if we want to add a border to one of our elements, I think I'm going to start by making these just have a different color, just quickly. So I'm going to give them each div an ID just to make them easy to target. So ID equals 2. This is not really a good strategy if you were trying to style these in the real world. I mean, you could, but I'm just doing it to make it very clear here. So we'll have background color there. We'll have 2. We'll have its own background color as well. I'll use this background color for 1. They'll all be 200 by 200. And then 3, we'll have this darker color, I guess. Is that right? Sure. So background color on 3. And I'm just doing this to make them distinct, because right now we can't exactly tell where one ends and the next begins. Okay, so those are our 3 elements, 3 divs. Now what I'm going to do is add on a border. So I'll just do it on the top one maybe. I'll set border width to be some number of pixels. Now we can use other units, but pixels are commonly used for borders because generally a border is going to be small and it's going to stay roughly the same size. So pixels are a pretty good unit to use. So I'll do something like maybe 5 pixels, a pretty thick border, and we don't see anything. Well, that's because we haven't set a color and we haven't set a style. So that next property is border color, and there's no order here. You don't have to do width and then color. But let's start with black. Do we see anything? Nope. And that's because we're missing border style. And border style, I'm just going to start with solid. But we do have other options. And finally, I have my border. Alrighty. So a couple of things. You can see the border here. It goes right up against our content, up against this pinkish salmon-y color background, whatever you want to call that. And then it's 5 pixels wide. So that means 5 pixels here, 5 pixels here. So it's shifted over 10 pixels. You can see that difference right there compared to the one below it. This element is no longer 200 pixels wide by 200 pixels tall. It's 210 by 210. Because our border is 5 pixels on either side. And if you look right here, I'll hover again, you can see that Chrome tells us 210 by 210. Now we can actually change this if we wanted to. I'll just show this very, very briefly. We have a property called box sizing. And if I set it to border box, now the width of our element is actually going to go from border to border. So from the outside edge to the outside edge of the entire element. So what that means is, if I refresh, this element, when I say it's 200 pixels wide, it's going to be exactly 200 pixels. And if I have a border, that's actually going to subtract from that 200 pixels. So we end up with, 5 pixels, 5 pixels, and then this pink area would be 190, versus when I get rid of that, the width that we set, 200 pixels, corresponds to the width of our content on the inside, and then the border is added on top, so it actually grows. So 2 different models that you can use. It really depends. Sometimes this is easier because you can set the width of the entire element, including the border. Anyway, so that's the first little bit of border. Let's play around with a couple other things. Let's give a different border to the second element. So border, let's do border color of, how about, let's steal one of these colors again. How about a very light border there? It's not that light, is it? But we'll steal that. Border width will be 3 pixels, and border style this time will be something else. And I'll show you some examples of what we can do with border style. You can have a dotted border, an inset border, which I guess is supposed to look like an inset box. We can have a dashed border, and you can actually have more than one style at once. If you can see this here, you can have dashed and then solid. This will do the top and bottom, and then the left and right. Or we can do something like this. We can have 4, where we set the top and then the right and then the bottom and then the left. Honestly, very rare that you need to do that, but you do have that option. I should just show it to you. But here are the ones that we can use. I'll do a dashed border. So let's try that. Border style dashed. I'll go back to my code, refresh. Ooh, that is just so hideous. But there's my dashed border, and it's 3 pixels on each side. Is that what I said? Yes. Okay. So we can also do things like set the border left color to be different. So we have all of these properties, color, width, and style, or border color, border width, and border style, with variants for each side. Border left color, border left width, and border left style, and for right, top, and bottom as well. But I'll just change the color of the left one maybe, or how about the thickness maybe? Border left width will be 8 pixels. We're not going for beauty, but you can see we do get that thicker border there. All right, so now what I'll show you is what you'll most commonly encounter, which is the border shorthand. It's a single property that can be used to set the border width, the border color, and the border style in one go. So it's just border, and then typically I provide a thickness, I provide the style and the color in one go. You can also provide just one of those at a time, or you can provide all of them, but that's what I like to do. Always reference the docs if you have questions about the order of things, but width, style, and then color. So we provide those 3 in a row. Now this is a pattern, this idea of a shorthand property, which will set multiple other properties in one go. Border is just one example. We'll see some others, but let's just start with border. So if I wanted to add a 4 pixel dotted border, it's going to be ugly, and I want it to be, black, sure, or white. Let's do white on this one. We'll do black. Okay, if that's what I want, I can simply set border, and then first is the thickness. So I said 4 pixels, I think, and then next is the style. So I'll start with solid, and then after that, the color. So 4 pixels solid, white. Refresh. It's a bit hard to tell because the background is white, so that was very stupid. Let's do black. There you go. You can see that black border. It's 4 pixels. It's exactly the same if I had done these properties individually, border color, border width, and border style, but it's shorter. And this is definitely what you'll see the most often. And what I like to do is, if I have all sides are going to be black, but then actually one of them is going to be thicker, or one of them is going to be dotted. You can set them all like this, and then afterwards say, okay, border left style will be dotted. So you can come in and update one out of those, or 2, or whatever you need to do if there's a situation where that makes sense. Just as an example, like one of these divs right here, or whatever these are, they've got some border, let's say it's 2 pixels blue on these 3 sides, and then the left is thicker. So you could totally do that using this exact same approach. Set them all at once, and then make the left one thicker, or dotted, or something like that. And while we're on the topic of border, one other thing I should mention that is related to border is border radius. Border radius allows us to set the radius of our corners here so we can make more rounded edges. So you can see some examples here. This is setting border radius to be 30 pixels. So you can use a pixel value, though often what I like to use it as is actually a percentage. And the reason for that, I'll just show you here. Let's make one of them. What should we do? Maybe the bottom one here. These are all going to be pretty ugly looking. But if I set a border radius on here to be something like 10 pixels, and I refresh, that applies to all 4 sides, and we get slightly rounded corners, which is nice. But if I use a percentage, the percentage will be a percentage of the width of our box and the height of the box, depending on, so it does 2 axes. You can set your border radius, right, to be different, going one direction versus the other. You can have an elliptical corner instead of just a circular corner. Anyway, what I'm going to do is set this to be 50%. Just start with that, and you'll see what we end up with. This is a really common approach to make circles. So the content itself is not going to be contained in that, but we could use this to create circular images, and there are ways of getting your content to stay within this. But for now, just wanted to show you can play with border radius to make slightly rounded corners or very rounded corners. You also can do it just for 1 corner or 2 corners. You can see there's a bunch of different options on the MDN, and there's also separate properties like border top left radius, border top right radius, and so on. So you can set them individually, set them all at once, set it with a pixel value, or set it with a percentage. And it's how you can create these nice rounded corners. People use this to make different shapes as well. So if you do it differently on 2 corners versus the other 2, you can end up with these kind of nice looking shapes, some of them at least. But generally, I use it most frequently to either round the corners slightly, to create something like this maybe, or to make actual circles. So that's border. We saw a bunch of border properties: border width, border color, border style, and then we saw the border shorthand, and then we also saw border radius. Really commonly used properties. They'll come up a lot in the rest of the course.